lot of material to get through. I'm probably going to be reading quite a bit off the screen because, as I say, this is primarily Richard's research. Well, it is Richard's research really. So I've written some of my own notes on that. So I'm not an expert like Richard is on this case. I've watched all the films, studied it, etc. But there may be facts that I forget. You know, my background is not so much real crime, true crime, as in scientific stuff primarily and things like that. So forgive me if I'm sort of, not quite as fluent as one might. This is the first time I've done this presentation as well. So a lot of these others have done several times. So without saying all that, let me go on, and we'll see where we get to. So tell you a bit about me, for those that don't know me. I'm not exactly a local boy, but I'm from North Yorkshire, and I grew up in Skipton, and then I went to grammar school there, Hermisted's Grammar School, which was founded in 1492, and then I went to Lancaster University, did computer science and physics for 3 years, came out of there, went to work for GC Electoral Projects in Rugby, stayed there for 18 months, then I went to GPT in Nottingham, which was Plessy, if anybody knows Plessy, which used to be a telecommunications company. I got an interest in tutoring and teaching and education, ran a night school class in C programming for about 2 or 3 years. Ended up working from home in 1997, just before my daughter was born. I've been working at home since then. I currently work part-time for the Open University as a tutor. I was doing student assessments up until April this year when the office closed, so I lost all that work. But since April I've been writing, I've actually written 2 books since April, and I'm currently working on a 3rd one, so I'm sort of investing some time in that. And I got interested in all this stuff in 2003 when I found Stephen Greer's Disclosure Project. That's when I started unpicking the veneer and scratching the veneer and all that and digging down and so forth. And I first met and did an interview with Richard in 2010, so that's how we got to know each other, which was to do with the 9/11 research, basically. So that's what brought me here. So this presentation is based mostly, if not entirely, on Richard's research, as I've said. His research, in turn, is based on the research of a few others, and he's put their names in the films, but the main ones I've got them at the end. Now, I haven't really investigated the case. Richard's been out, and not only has he gone through all the blogs and websites and books and Amaral's book and things, he's had boots on the ground. There's somebody who's associated with the Madeleine case who lives in Nottingham, and I know that Richard went to see him because after he'd been to see him, he came to see me, and I live quite near Nottingham now. So I read Amaral's book, for example. That's been translated as an unofficial English translation, which you can download. I read that probably a couple of years ago now. But I'm mainly going to describe the evidence compiled by Richard D. Hall. I'm going to add some of my own opinions on that. It's obviously a very emotive subject. A lot of people, have expressed various opinions about this case, about things like parental care is one thing, and abductions and so forth. And I'm going to state some of my own opinions, as I say. But with that in mind, if this works, we'll now hear from Jerry McCann to start us off.
We had very clear objectives, what we wanted, and any parents would take the opportunity of trying to get information into the investigation.
That there is no evidence that Madeleine is dead, and there's no evidence to implicate us in her death.
Everything we've done during the last 100 days is focused on the belief that Madeleine was alive when she was abducted.
That evening, did you give to your kids something like Calpol to help them sleep?
We're not going to comment on anything, but there is absolutely no way we used any sedative drugs or anything like that.
How do you feel now that Amaral's book is going to be on the shelves here?
Yeah, so, well, as we've already alluded to, anyone who wants to convince people that Madeleine is dead without evidence to support it, their motives have to be questioned.
Can you update people? Where are you now? Have you got any new leads? What's happening with your investigations?
Well, I'd like to say to you that we did have some hot leads, but
Cuando vosotros os enteráis de eso, de que la policía ha descubierto sangre en el apartamento, ¿cómo reaccionáis?
Do you know what? This is all investigation. You need to speak to the police. It's just, all your questions are about the investigation. And we can't comment on them.
Jerry? No.
We can't answer questions about it.
No, but
I
I asked about your reaction.
And we're going to hear some more from Jerry McCann now, just a little bit.
I would like to emphasise that I strongly believe in freedom of speech. I don't have a problem somebody purporting a theory, writing fiction, suggestions.
That is just a very brief clip, and we'll use other clips from Richard's films. That I think is from the third of the 4 films, out of the 4 films. So just a note about the films, again, I'm going to refer to them right throughout this. This is essentially a summary of the films, really. There are 4 main ones, which is the true story of Madeleine McCann buried by the mainstream media. And then we've got the second film, which is The Phantoms. The third film, When Madeleine Died. And the 4th film, Why the Cover-Up. There is also an additional film, which I mentioned very briefly already, which is the analysis by the statement analyst Peter Hyatt, which is called Embedded Confessions. And then, as I sort of mentioned briefly too, those films themselves are kind of split down, and there's actually Richard sort of split them up essentially into 9 different films, some of them which appear on one DVD and so forth. So there's a lot of information. And he's also added some extra information from some of his tours that he's done, and Richard's going on tour again in April next year. So you know, he's continued to investigate the case. And if you watch the latest Rich Planet, he did another mini update, which I may try and bring in at the end just very briefly. That was only came out on Wednesday last week. So the sources of information here, you can get pretty much yourself if you want to go and check this. It's all online, and the main one really is the one at the bottom here, which is the McCann PJ files, and also The Truth of the Lie, which is Gonçalo Amaral's book, and we're going to sort of see how all this fits together as we go through. And then additionally there's Kate McCann's book, Madeleine, Our Daughter's Disappearance and the Continuing Search for Her 2011. That is also got quite a lot of information in it. It's her own book. And there's a book by this chap called Peter Mack, a free ebook which you can download. And then the Portuguese police files with their English translations are held at that website. There's about a gigabyte of information there. And the PJ judiciary files were made public and posted on the web some years ago. And this would never have happened in the UK. You would never get that in the UK. This is, I think, a sort of peculiarity of Portuguese law. Or I think probably what you'll find is that they got so fed up of all the interference, they thought, right, we're just going to publish this now. You know, no one's going to stop us. Okay, so what is the official story? What's the official narrative? What is supposed to have happened? This is derived from Gonçalo Amaral's book. Madeleine Beth McCann, an English girl of nearly 4 years of age, allegedly disappeared during the night of May 3rd to 4th, 2007, obviously 10 years ago now, at the Ocean Club, one of the many tourist complexes in the village of Luz, or Praia de Luz as it's often called, in Lagos, Portugal. She was sleeping in a bedroom in the apartment block beside her sister and her brother. They were twins, aged 2 years. During this time, their parents were dining 100 metres away with a group of friends and holiday companions. After the missing girl was reported to the police, Gonçalo Amaral headed up the investigation. And the case has received global media attention, which itself is unusual. You know, I've got clips in here from I've got one clip in here from a US news broadcast, for example. Why would the US be interested in a child abduction case? And all this centres around the Tapas 7. So who are the Tapas 7? Well, this is from the BBC News website. They are people that were keen witnesses in the disappearance of Madeleine McCann. The friends are to donate to the libel payment to Find Madeleine Fund because they've been, you know, the McCanns are very litigious. They've sued people who've tried to expose some of the evidence which, for example, people like Richard have. Richard hasn't been sued, by the way, but somebody that was working with him has been sued and was sued a few years ago. 7 friends who dined with Kate and Jerry McCann on the night of Madeleine McCann's disappearance were central witnesses to the case. Their evidence was pored over by the police and their backgrounds closely scrutinised by journalists and bloggers alike. None of the 7 were ever a formal suspect or arguido, and all cooperated willingly and voluntarily with the investigation. And that's not actually, strictly speaking, true because this is out of date. Bound by judicial secrecy laws while the case was still being investigated by the Portuguese police, most made no public comment about what they saw. So none of the Tapas 7 would initially comment. And they have now received £375,000 in libel payout from Express newspapers after untrue allegations about their conduct appeared in 3 publications. And the friendship with the McCanns goes back a long way. 4 of the group, Matthew Oldfield, Russell O'Brien, David Payne and Fiona Payne, studied medicine together at Leicester University in the early 1990s. So that's how they knew each other. The Paynes then became a couple. So this is the timeline of the events on the 3rd of May. So, 5:30, Kate, according to the McCanns and the Tapas 7, Kate and Jerry McCann pick up their 3 children from afternoon tea at the Ocean Club. This is the resort where the McCanns were staying. Jerry begins a game of tennis with other guests at 6 o'clock. At 20 to 7, David Payne checks on Kate and the children at Jerry's request and sees Madeleine. Jerry finishes playing tennis at 7 o'clock. At 20:35, Kate and Jerry McCann arrive at the Ocean Club's tapas restaurant. That's where the Tapas 7 comes from. Jerry checks on his children at 21:05 and sees Madeleine alive and well. 21:15, having left the table to check on her own children, Jane Tanner sees a man carrying a child, which we'll study later, close to the McCann's apartment. 21:30, Matthew Oldfield checks on the McCann's apartment. Hearing no noise from the children's bedroom, he assumes all is well and leaves without seeing Madeleine. 2200, Kate McCann checks on her children. Madeleine is gone, according to their story. So this is all on the 3rd of May. So what happened next? People went searching for Madeleine and there was apparently quite a commotion. Portuguese police were called, they came and they started looking around. And the British media began to report details of the case very early on, only a few hours after the abduction had been reported. So there's quite, very short time between this being reported to the police and it actually coming out in a media news story. The Tapas 7 members were all interviewed by the Portuguese police soon after the events, and Leicestershire police were then asked to coordinate the UK police response. That was a few days later. And British diplomats and consul also got involved in the case very early on. So this is a lady called Sherry Dodd. She was appointed Special Foreign Office Ambassador for the McCanns on the next day, the day after the abduction. So suddenly they've got this Foreign Office Ambassador assigned to them the next day. Soon after this, a letter was leaked to the Belgian press. The letter was to the UK government and it was from an unnamed senior British diplomat. So I'm showing her picture on the screen because it probably came from this Sherry Dodd, but we don't know that. The name wasn't given, so it could have been somebody else. So she was asked to support the McCanns, and this British diplomat that the letter was leaked to the Belgian press said that the letter expressed strong reservations about the diplomatic service being involved with the McCanns, noting inconsistencies in the McCann statements and the fact that they weren't being very cooperative with the police. So that had come from the British consul. So, my interpretation of that is that she was asked to go and see the McCanns, speak to them, ask what happened, and she didn't really like what she heard. So she thought, right, I've got to just tell somebody about this. And so that letter eventually got leaked to the Belgian press. That could be wrong, but that's just my interpretation of that scenario. So there was an overall perception of the case that basically has come into being and is largely still in place. that the McCanns left their children without a babysitter. And we'll probably come on to why even that's a bit strange, even if you take that as being the real thing that happened. They are therefore, at the very least, irresponsible parents. So a lot of people were saying when they heard about this, oh, they should never have left their children. You know, I'd never have done that as a parent. You know, I've got a son. I would have never have left my children. You know, and that was the thing that came out fairly early on. Many people may not realise or remember that the Portuguese police, after several weeks of investigation, made the McCanns suspects themselves in the crime, arguidos. The McCanns made numerous appearances on TV, and the most recent one was with Fiona Bruce, 30th of April this year, 10 years after the alleged disappearance. And then people would then, of course, say, well, if the McCanns were guilty of, you know, anything to do with the death of their child, why would they ever agree to be interviewed like this? Why? Why wouldn't they just go and, you know, hide away somewhere? It is almost certainly the case that the McCanns are or became part of a much bigger overall picture. As you'll see, I think you'll see that becomes clear as we go through the evidence that Richard put in his films. Okay, so pretty early on, you know, on the night of the alleged abduction, so we're talking the 3rd of May, in the morning of the 4th of May, the Portuguese police were assigned to investigate the case. The story put out by the McCanns was that Kate went to check the apartment and the front door, which had apparently been locked, and it was open, and the shutters of the apartment window had been jemmied open, and Madeleine was missing at 10 p.m. So there was talk from Kate McCann that the apartment had had the shutters jemmied open. Shutters jemmied open. That was the first story that came out, I think, on May the 4th. Now, John Hill, he was the manager of the Ocean Club, that's the resort where they were staying, and he said there was no sign of the shutters being jemmied. They actually went to inspect them, and there's a video of this on YouTube as well. Hence, questions were raised about it being an abduction, so there was already early doubts that an abduction had actually taken place. Jerry McCann changed his story about leaving the building after checking. He said he went through the patio door, not the front door, and left it unlocked. Kate McCann tells the story about the curtains in the bedroom blowing open when she went to look in the room at 10 p.m. Police photographs show that this could not have been the case. So again, you can look at these photographs all online. So in other words, Kate McCann says the bedroom window was open and the curtains were blowing in the wind, but the photographs show that that probably wasn't the case. Portuguese police strongly suspected the crime scene had either been tampered with or arranged for them to see. And I've got a letter from one of the Portuguese police investigators which says that. Now, if you watch Richard's films, he looks at some of the inconsistencies in the accounts of the Tapas 7. He studies that in quite a lot of detail. In fact, most of the first film is concerned with that. And I've got a few examples in the next couple of slides about the inconsistencies in these accounts. So if the story was true, about the abduction that is, you'd expect more agreement between the witnesses, and there is some major disagreements. David Payne claims to have seen the McCann's children a few hours before the abduction when he visited the apartment. This was about 6:30. We'll see some of the timeline in a minute. Kate McCann says that she remembers this visit, and Richard's film examines in quite considerable detail these two accounts. So, and we're going to just summarise a comparison of those two accounts, which have come from the films. So, if you know, they both gave accounts to the police. I think they were re-interviewed. You'll find they were re-interviewed by Leicestershire police. So they gave some accounts and statements to the Portuguese police, and they gave accounts to Leicester police. But if you take these accounts and look at David Payne's account on the left and Kate McCann's account on the right, David Payne says that in the apartment the patio door was open. Kate McCann says at the same time the patio door was closed. David Payne entered the apartment without knocking. Kate McCann heard knocking. David Payne says that when he went into the apartment, this was around about 6:30 in the evening, 5:30, that Kate McCann was dressed. Kate McCann said that when David Payne came to visit, she was in a towel. David Payne says that he entered the apartment to speak to Kate, and Kate McCann says that he remained outside. David Payne says that his visit took 3 to 5 minutes when he went to see them. This is again was before this alleged abduction took place. Kate McCann said he was there for about 30 seconds. David Payne said that he saw all 3 children. This is in his account to Leicestershire Police, which is the videos of apparently. Kate McCann said that she made no mention. It was, in other words, she just spoke to David. David didn't interact with the children or comment on them or anything like that. So right there, we've got major discrepancies in the witness accounts of the time before this alleged abduction. And also, again, when David Payne, when he was questioned about the reason for his visit to the apartment, why did he go there at 6:30? You know, what was he doing? Was he having a cup of tea? What was he doing? So the reasons that are given at different times were just for a visit. Second reason was to bring the children down from the apartment to the tennis courts. The third reason was to see if Kate was all right. The fourth reason was to look after the children. The fifth reason was to see if Jerry could play tennis. And the sixth reason was Dr. Payne just offered to go there for whatever reason. So we don't know why David Payne went to the apartment, or even if he did now, because there are so many discrepancies with the account of him actually going there that it becomes unreliable. So, as I alluded to with the British diplomat's letter, she'd said that the McCanns weren't cooperating with the police, and this was what happened a bit later on, because, you know, the whole thing happened in May. Then the McCanns went back to England, and then I think they had to go back to Portugal in September. And Kate McCann was re-interviewed by the Portuguese police on September the 7th, 2007. And she was asked, what did you see? This was when she went into the room to see Madeleine. What did you do? Where did you search? And what did you handle? That's what she was asked. In other words, her child has been abducted. She's in the room. She sees the bed is empty. That's her story. And that was the list of 4 questions that she was asked. She exercised her right to remain silent. She was asked a further 47 questions and said no comment for each one. And that's in the Portuguese police's records. So if she wanted Madeleine found, why wouldn't she answer the questions? Surely the Portuguese police were going to help to find Madeleine because she'd been abducted. Surely Kate McCann would have given the Portuguese police any information that she had about the scene, the people there, anything she could remember to help get her child back. She refused to answer, and that was when they were made. Kate McCann was made a suspect because she wouldn't cooperate about the abduction of her child, giving information about that. They said, right, you're a suspect now. So this was the letter that was written of the facts surrounding the investigation of a report by Chief Inspector Tavares de Almeida, and this was dated the 10th of September, so this is 3 days after Kate McCann was questioned. Of course, this was originally in Portuguese, but it's been translated into English. So this was one of the investigating officers' report to the higher-up guy, I forget his name. So he had to write this report for his superior, and it said this: the minor Madeleine McCann died in apartment 5A at the Ocean Club Resort in Praia de Luz on the night of the 3rd of May 2007. A simulation, a staged hoax of an abduction took place. In order to render the child's death impossible before 10 p.m, a situation of checking by the McCann couple's children while they slept was concocted. Dr. Gerald McCann and Dr. Kate McCann are involved in the concealment of the corpse of their daughter, Madeleine McCann. At this moment, there seems to be no strong indications that the child's death was other than from the result of a tragic accident. Yet, from what has been established up to now, everything indicates that the McCann couple, in self-defence, did not want to deliver up Madeleine McCann's corpse immediately and voluntarily, and there is a strong possibility, therefore, that it was moved from the initial place where she died. This situation may raise questions concerning the circumstances in which the death of the child took place. There is strong evidence that the crime scene was altered and some furniture was moved around, and those changes are indications that the abduction was a staged, managed simulation. So in other words, despite what you might have read in the British press, and I think you'll hear comments later in this presentation, that the Portuguese police bungled the investigation, they didn't. They knew exactly what was going on. They collected the evidence and they knew what had happened. And we're going to come on to some of that other compelling evidence very shortly. But we also need to look at, well, I've already mentioned this British diplomat getting involved, the British consul getting involved and so forth fairly early on. So let's explore that area a bit more, and Richard does this, of course, in his films. 3 days after Madeleine was reported missing, this chap called Clarence Mitchell suddenly became the McCann spokesman. We're going to talk a bit more about him in a minute. At the time, Mitchell was the head of the Blair government's powerful media machine, the media monitoring unit inside the COI, which was the Central Office of Information. And his salary, which was Clarence Mitchell's salary, was £100,000 per annum. So how is it that this child just gets sort of sadly abducted, and this high-powered PA that works for the Blair government suddenly becomes their spokesman 3 days afterwards? Then, less than 3 weeks later, Mitchell was transferred to the Foreign Office, where he stayed until the McCanns came home. And I forget the date they came home, but it was, I think it was at least a couple of weeks later, may have been a lot longer. Clarence Mitchell was appointed to head up the McCann's campaign only 48 hours after the abduction was reported. What could a PR man do to help find Madeleine? Was he an expert at finding children? Did he have a previous record in, dealing with abduction cases? No. He was a public relations figure. Okay. Oh, I don't know if I've got a duplicate slide there. Okay, yeah. So, 40 people, let's see. Yeah, he was in charge of 40 people at the media monitoring unit. And he actually said, this is Mitchell said, he famously boasted to a Spanish magazine, L'Espresso, "My job was to control what comes out in the media." That's what he said. Mitchell worked for the BBC on high-profile crime cases such as the Jill Dando case and the Soham murders case and the Rosemary and Fred West case. And just as a sort of very brief footnote to this, one of the last presentations I did here, which was about crop circles, there was a little news report that I had which was about Operation Blackbird, which was a military inspection of crop circle sites back in 1990. And the reporter for that story was Clarence Mitchell, funnily enough. It appears that it was mainly Mitchell who was responsible for a series of cover stories in the media, many of them centring around the appearance and action of a supposed abductor, which is, again, what I'm going to come on to. And in September 2008, Mitchell went to work for a company as a reputation manager at Freud International, which was owned by Matthew Freud, which of course is the son-in-law of a certain Rupert Murdoch. So the media connection there again. A bit more about Clarence Mitchell came from this chap, Tony Bennett. "I was being interviewed at my home for a film in late 2008 about my book on the McCann case by a northern-based film company. The company owner said he had a great deal of knowledge about Clarence Mitchell, whom he described as the number 2 at MI5. Earlier that year, another journalist told Tony Bennett exactly the same thing. So, media man, MI5 man, potentially. Definitely a media man and potentially MI5 as well. So he said that he could get stories put out in the mainstream. He was doing it for the Blair government, essentially. He controlled what came out in the media. And then he basically didn't say he was doing that for the McCann case, but he strongly implied that that's what he was doing. So these stories, to help get the abduction case accepted and so forth, these are some of the stories that came out. 21st of September 2007, abductor in apartment at the same time as Jerry. That story came out. There's no evidence that was true. 25th of September, the story of Charlotte Pennington. We're going to talk more about her later with this high tea, which is another mythical thing that seems to have happened. There was this story of Mrs. Fenn who heard a baby crying. That is also an extremely dubious story. That came out in August 2007. 4th of May 2007, Jemmy Shutter's window open. These seem to be jumping around the dates, but never mind. Get the idea. 9th of September, David Payne visit to Kate. That came out in the media. All these little details and false stories coming out. His first full account of the missing 6 hours. That was 22nd of September 2007. Eugene Zapata, which we'll mention, that came out in September 17th. Sighting in Morocco of Madeleine, or somebody that looked like Madeleine, that came out 25th of September. 11th of May, not long after the event, a week after the event, the Sagres incident and the searching of a murky Algarve lake in February 2008. Again, that seems to have been fabricated. 14th of October 2007, Cat Baker, suspicious man, high tea. We're going to come on to some of these instances, as I say. 8th of August 2009, Victoria Beckham lookalike. 13th of September 2009, Alpha Investigations, and you're going to see why, certainly probably about half of these we're going to mention as to why these are probably just completely made up stories. And then 16th of October 2013, Portuguese police did not take notice of Smith's sighting, which is this other chap we're going to mention as well. He allegedly sighted a potential abductor, but that's also a very strange story. And then you get stories like this in the Express, of course. You know, Maddie detective did lie about death cover-up claim, so you can see the death cover-up claim is being stated as a lie in the Express. And then Richard has pointed out, you know, sometimes subliminal things that are put into the press as well. And, you know, don't want to labour it, but here we've got the Maddie story, and then in the bottom right-hand corner of this page, you've got the truth. So people might just sort of, from a glance, associate the truth with this story as it being the truth, if you see what I mean. The other person that's connected to this case is the former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown. He also had closed connections to the case, and Jerry McCann has mentioned that he called Gordon Brown several times. Jerry McCann's said this in one or two interviews. I haven't got the clip in here, but it's in Richard's films and online. Gordon Brown contacted the Portuguese police and asked them to release the Jane Tanner story. The police were reluctant to do so and made a low-key announcement. When Brown became PM, which was after the McCann's alleged abduction, his involvement in the case increased. Times reported Brown's support of McCann's I forget, I haven't got a date for that. But Kate McCann also reports in her book how she received a call from the former Prime Minister's wife, Cherie Blair. So why are the McCanns getting all this, you know, high level of interest in top level stuff? You know, it's people in the British government, high up in the government. It's a child that was abducted, for heaven's sake. So what's going on? And we're going to learn more about this Jane Tanner story in very shortly. So important people near the McCanns, soon after the announcement of the abduction story, they were all, you know, milling around them, basically. And Richard's film covers the role of this Bell Pottinger group, and they're a notorious public relations agency, and I think they've recently just about gone bust, actually, that accept millions to help give certain African regimes, e.g. the Congo, a better image worldwide, and you can read the stories about this. You have people in London who are from the Congo actually picketing their offices saying, you know, don't support this evil regime that's, you know, practicing genocide of one form or another. Also, Alex Woolfall was a senior figure in Bell Pottinger. He was dispatched to Praia de Los, PDL, is the abbreviation I've used there, and began to search the McCann's cameras for images, which again we'll touch on that later. And the last photo of Madeleine, allegedly taken on the 3rd of May in the afternoon, was not produced until 3 weeks later, but we've got to come on to that shortly. Okay, so that's a list from one of Richard's slides from his film of the people that were involved. These were all helping the McCanns during the days following the abduction report. And Mark Warner was the name of the holiday company. It's a bit like, I think, a sort of Thomas Cook for rich people. A group linked to the UK intelligence services, Control Risks, also got involved as early as May 2007, and Kate McCann actually mentions them in her book. So the head of crisis management, Bell Pottinger, he was involved. Alex Woolfall, he went out to Praia de Luz. Top staff from Mark Warner in Portugal, John Hill, the Ocean Club manager, but it's fair enough he would have been involved because that's where it happened. Emma Knights and Craig Mayhew. British ambassador to Portugal, John Buck, was involved. British Embassy press officer, Andy Bowes. British consul for Lisbon, Liz Dow. Local British consul, Bill Henderson, and his colleague. And then this trauma psychologist from the Centre of Crisis Psychology, Alan Pike, and he's actually from Skipton, funnily enough. Now, perhaps one of the key helpers that we can talk about is this fellow, and Robert Murat, and Richard's made a whole film on him. He's a key figure in the McCann story in understanding what actually happened. He is and was a regular visitor to the area because he's got property there. I think he's got his mother's got a house there. When he heard that Madeleine was reported missing, he checked the garden of the house and greenhouse, according to him, because he eventually got involved with the police, as you'll see. He started a conversation with a passerby named Stephen Carpenter, and he was then accompanied to the place of the disappearance and was introduced to the McCanns because he spoke the two languages. So the background, according to Murat, of him getting involved was he lived in the area, he heard the story on the radio, checked that this child wasn't in his garden, went out onto the street, walking down the street, met this guy called Stephen Carpenter who gave him the lowdown of what had happened. He was taken to the apartment, introduced to the McCanns. He was bilingual, spoke Portuguese and English, so he was apparently a handy helper, according to that story. With an employee of the complex and the GNR, he opened several apartments to look for the missing child. So why would this guy just sort of come off the street, basically start looking in apartments with this John Hill guy? And as I said, being bilingual, he offered to help out as a translator for the Portuguese police. And they agreed eventually. We'll come back to Murat. But going back to Mitchell for a moment, look at this. Look what happened. Clarence Mitchell arranged for the McCanns to meet the Pope. How does that happen? How many people get to meet the Pope? Whatever you might think of him. And they actually met on the 30th of May 2007, and of course here's the pictures. Mitchell actually spoke to Cormac Murphy O'Connor, who's the Archbishop of Westminster, who apparently arranged it. And a note about the Madeleine McCann case was posted on the Vatican website, but it was soon deleted when the McCanns were made suspects. So very highly connected. This is like, what is it, the head of 1 billion Catholics, is it, or something? So now we'll talk a little bit about Leicestershire Police, because remember, this happened in Portugal. Why should British police be involved? It didn't involve any, not on the surface at least, any criminal activity in the UK. Leicestershire Police don't get involved. It's the local police's, responsibility. Leicestershire Police became involved very early on in the case, considering the events were taking place in a foreign country. Superintendent Bob Small flew to Portugal with at least 2 other officers. Soon after this, they were involved in setting up an identity parade, including this Robert Murat character, the translator guy. Jane Tanner, who had reported seeing the possible abductor, was then asked to identify from the parade who she thought was involved. She identified Murat, as did 4 other members of the 7, but later on they changed their stories. So they actually named Murat as the abductor. Matt Baggett, who was the chief of Leicestershire Police, made a statement to the Leveson inquiry, and this is on that website there. I've put the link in. Due to the thirst for information from the media, every individual working in Leicestershire supporting the police investigation signed a confidentiality agreement. Messages were also disseminated to all staff to make them aware that even private conversations with friends could be reported on in the media, and the confidentiality agreement was something that was put together by the Gold Group, who were running the inquiry as part of the UK effort, not by myself as Chief Constable. Let's read that again. The Gold Group, who were running the inquiry as part of the UK effort. But I thought it was Leicestershire Police that were running it. But Matt Baggett is basically saying it wasn't us that was coordinating this, it was somebody else, this gold group. According to Gonçalo Amaral, UK police invaded and hindered their investigation. Why were they there? In a statement by Matt Baggett, Chief of Leicestershire Police, he said there was a need to coordinate media interaction. To coordinate media interaction. Note, he did not say to help find Madeleine. So I think things are already becoming a bit clearer, hopefully, as to what actually was going on and what has been going on ever since. So one researcher, and you can find this on this, there's this website called Write to Them, which you might find, where you can find all the Freedom of Information requests that have been made public. Very useful website, actually. So one researcher, I think I can't remember, made a note of his name on here, but I've got the link. And by the way, if anybody wants to follow this up, and I've got some links in the presentation and stuff, you can go onto my website, checktheevidence.com, click on the contact button, and if you want any of these links and stuff, I'll try and send you what I have. So this chap, he submitted a Freedom of Information request to Leicestershire Police, and he asked them for clarification about elements of Matt Baggett's statement about the gold group or gold strategy, which I just highlighted on the previous slide. The request was denied with the following response. Following receipt of your request, searches were conducted within Leicestershire. The police, within Leicestershire Police, I've badly formatted this slide, to locate information relevant to your request. In accordance with the Freedom of Information Act 2000, the Act, this response represents a refusal notice under Section 17(1) of the Act. Leicestershire Police can neither confirm nor deny that it holds the information you requested, as the duty in Section 1(a) of the Act does not apply by virtue of the following exemptions: international relations, investigations, law enforcement, or personal information. But he was asking about this gold group. He wasn't asking about McCann's or, Madeleine or anything. He's asking about this gold group. They wouldn't release information. So draw your own conclusions on that. So now we're going to go on to one of the sort of pillars that really I think is shows that the McCanns were lying, basically. And that's to do with the cadaver dogs. And some of this was reported in the, I don't think this has really ever been on the TV news. You might have got a brief mention. I know some of this was in the print media. So a key part of the early investigation by the Portuguese police was the employment of cadaver dogs trained by expert Martin Grimes. And the graphic on the right, I know the pictures are small, it's not vastly important to what I'm describing. The graphic shows where the dogs alerted to blood and cadaver odour. These were brought in by Portuguese police. Although they were British, the guy that owns them is British, they were brought in by the Portuguese police.
In early August 2007, he brought his 2 dogs to Portugal. One of them, Eddie, was trained to alert to the odour of human corpses, and the other, Keela, to blood. As we shall see in detail, Martin Grime told Portuguese police officers that Eddie had detected the scent of death in no fewer than 11 locations associated with the McCanns, while Keela also detected the scent of blood in 3 of those very same locations. The dogs were deployed on different days, so they alerted to these locations independently of each other.
What I've first noticed is that as soon as I came in, that the dog's very excited, and as a handler I can pick up his body language, etc. It would appear to me that as soon as he's come in the house, he's picked up a scent that he recognises. If there isn't a scent source in here, i.e. a physical article where the scent is emitting from, any scent residue will collect in a particular place due to the air movement of the flat, or the apartment. And what I would say in this case is that there's enough scent in that area there for him to give me a bark indication. But the source may not be in that cupboard. The source may well be in this room somewhere else, but the air is actually pushing it into that corner. But is a strong indication, and I would say it's positive for the things that he's trained to find. And he's decided, yes, that's what I'm looking for, and that's when he's given me the bark indication. What we should understand with this dog is that he only barks when he finds something. He won't bark at any other time. The only times I've ever known him bark since I got him as a small puppy was A, for his dinner, and that's just excitement, and that's one of the training methods we use to teach him to bark when we wanted him to, and when he actually finds something. He won't bark at other dogs, he won't bark at strangers, he won't bark when somebody knocked on the door or anything like that. So again, I would say that's a positive indication.
Let there be no doubt about what Martin Grimes said his dogs were alerted to. He said, in effect, that his dogs were alerting to the past presence of a human corpse in those 11 locations. As we shall see in a moment, no other corpses had been present in those 11 locations. Therefore, if a corpse really had been in contact with those 11 locations, it could only have been that of Madeleine McCann. By July, 2 months into the investigations into Madeleine's disappearance, the team of detectives, led by Dr. Gonçalo Amaral, had clearly formed the view that the McCanns and their friends were not telling the truth, and were hiding something. They and top British police actively worked on the theory that Madeleine had in fact died in the McCanns' holiday apartment, and that the McCanns, perhaps with the help of others, had hidden or disposed of her body.
That was pretty much convincing evidence, and there were other things that weren't included in that clip. I think I've got them on the next slide. You know, like the dogs also responded to the McCanns hired a car, and there were traces of odour found in the hire car of a cadaver as well. So it wasn't just the apartment. So in her book, Kate McCann describes how she was shown the cadaver dog video by the police. She played down this evidence and claimed that the dog's alerts were false and in response to the handler's signals. So of course they would deny this evidence. Jerry McCann also dismissed the significance of the sniffer dogs as unreliable. Kate McCann later gave various explanations for why the dogs had alerted for blood and DNA. And they alerted to Cuddle Cat, which was Madeleine's toy. And so when it was pointed out that the dogs were alerting to blood evidence as well, there was one for cadaver and one for blood, which they found behind the sofa, they put forward various explanations as to how this blood had actually been, got there. Basically, they didn't deny that the blood was there, but how had it got there? So they said that Madeleine had grazed her knee climbing the steps to the plane. She'd had a nosebleed, mosquitoes crashing into the wall, because this blood was on the wall of the apartment, dirty nappies allegedly left in the back of the car, which is why the dogs alerted to the back of the car. Rotting meat was another explanation put forward. Kate visiting 6 corpses in a fortnight was how she got this, because there was something I didn't have in the cadaver dog bit where they were alerted to clothing that she was wearing, Kate McCann was wearing. In other words, it appears that Kate McCann, according to the dog alert evidence, was carrying the body for a period of time, and it was put in the car. And the other excuse was that Kate had Madeleine's toy Cuddle Cat in her handbag while certifying the death, according to this. So these are the various explanations for why the dogs were alerting to either Kate McCann or the back of the car or whatever. Now, just to mention this, which I mentioned on an earlier slide, the Zapata case. Jerry McCann talked about a US murder case involving this dodgy-looking chap called Zapata, where the husband was accused of murdering his wife. In the case against Zapata, the sniffer dog evidence was ruled to be inadmissible by the judge due to their alleged previous inaccurate results, according to that case. What McCann did not mention, in other words, McCann says, oh yeah, remember that Zapata case, they used sniffer dogs in that, and they threw out the evidence. What he did not mention was that after the judge made this statement, Zapata later confessed to the murder and admitted he had placed the body just where the dogs had alerted. And that didn't come out in the press either. Okay. So now we'll look at the fundraising issues. We've looked at the cadaver dog evidence, which strongly suggests that Madeleine died in the apartment. Now we'll look at the funding. On the face of it, the Help Madeleine Fund seemed like a charity. In reality, it was and is a private company. And I went and checked this. You know, you can go onto this Companies House website, which has all the details about all the UK companies. And it does not have charitable status. It is not a charity. It's a private company. The funds from this company have seemingly been used for two purposes: to finance legal defence action for the McCanns and to fund dubious or bogus private investigation groups to continue a bogus search for Madeleine. And we'll talk more about some of these. And then again, Richard's films explore these bogus investigation groups in considerable detail. I think there's probably about an hour spent on these, if not more. I've got a summary of this.
But I'm joined now by Madeleine's great uncle, Brian Kennedy, and he's going to tell us about the Fighting Fund. What's been the public's response to it, Brian?
Well, it's been very good so far, but a lot of people have said they're not quite sure how they can give money, so may I tell them?
Yes, very briefly.
Right, very briefly. You can go into any branch of the NatWest or the Royal Bank of Scotland and just say that you would like to make a contribution to the Madeleine Fund.
But tell me, Brian, about all the people that have been coming up to you today, just literally stuffing money in your hand.
Yes, they have. It's very touching, very touching. I would just say this is not an appeal. The family haven't made an appeal. We've just set up a mechanism for people who said they wanted to do something and contribute, so that the money can be used for all sorts of reasons, but probably mainly for legal expenditure.
That was an honest answer. The McCanns already knew or sensed that they would be needing top-line solicitors and barristers. And indeed, over the past 7 years, the McCanns have had legal help worth an estimated £4 million or more. Here's a list. They have spent 5 years trying to claim £1 million damages from Dr. Conchalo Amaral, the coordinator of the initial investigation into Madeleine's disappearance, and attempting to ban his book, The Truth About a Lie. They spent nearly £400,000 silencing retired solicitor Tony Bennett with a libel action after he wrote 2 books on the case. And they've spent a small fortune on legal advice from a series of top solicitors and barristers who have advised them in relation to their having formally been declared suspects in the disappearance of their own daughter and the risks of being extradited to Portugal to face charges. But very soon the message was changed. The fund was not to be used for legal expenses, apparently. Instead, it was to be used to find Madeleine, and they launched a major Look for Madeleine campaign. How much the McCanns have raised in the way of donations and other contributions to their fund is shrouded in mystery.
And again, there's more on that in the films. Obviously, I'm just using a clip there. So I think that makes it clear what the Madeleine Fund is for. And then coupled with that, of course, we had the Find Madeleine website, which is still there. I think when I was looking at putting this together a few weeks ago, this website is still active. Because the McCanns actually employed this chap called Kevin Halligan. Halligan was apparently involved in a website set up to show a telephone hotline was set up to receive reports about Madeleine, but the information from these calls was not sent to the McCanns or their investigation team. Halligan was later arrested and served 4 years in prison in the USA for various other sort of he's basically a con man, would be the conclusion of that. And again, Richard goes in quite a lot of detail about that in his film, what Kevin Halligan got up to and the sorts of escapades he was involved in and where he was hanging out and stuff. There's quite a lot more about that in the film. But basically, my conclusion and summary of that is that Halligan somehow set up this website to take in reports of sightings of Madeleine, but it was just a honeypot type thing. It was not really, done in an honest way at all, not at all. Okay, so maybe just do this section and then we'll have a break. Private investigations. So of course, from the McCanns, side, Portuguese police, no hope, total loss, dead loss, messed it up. So we'll employ some private investigators to get on the case and help us find Madeleine. So initially, a Spanish detective agency called Metodo 3, which means the third method, was employed. Metodo 3 did not have a good reputation. They were paid £30,000 by the Catalan regional government to do a report on hazelnut farming, but this report seemed to have little or no relevance to anything. It was just like, I don't know, some payoff, to somebody, but it wasn't really used for anything, as from what I've read. Head of Metodo 3, Francisco Marco, made some completely bogus claims which were perhaps manufactured primarily for the British press to have something to repeat. He was later arrested for illegally bugging a Spanish politician. Other detectives at the agency were also arrested in relation to other activities, but none of these investigators were convicted. The detective agencies seemed to be a vehicle through which to funnel fake stories about sightings of Madeleine to the media and the McCanns. For example, this one, which I mentioned in an earlier slide. Actually, maybe I've got that on out of order. I'll come back to that. I've got that slide slightly out of order. This is the Moroccan peasant girl story. I've got this slightly out of order, but we will come back to that. I've got that on another slide, I think. And the next one that I mentioned in an earlier slide too was this Alpha Investigations. 13th of September 2009, so we're already sort of 18 months on from the alleged abduction. Alpha Investigations was revealed as the new investigation team after Metodo 3 were basically taken off the case and there was this guy was arrested and so forth. This was a pair called Dave Edgar and Arthur Cowley. Basically, there were two guys that were known to the Cheshire businessman Brian Kennedy, who had fronted the operations of the Madeleine Fund. So we've actually got two people named Brian Kennedy in the McCann case. One is Kate McCann's uncle, and the other is this Cheshire businessman. And Richard again talks about Brian Kennedy quite a lot in his films, in his first film. And I think he owns one of the football clubs as well. He owns one of the football clubs. And he owns quite a famous company, but I can't remember what it is. But somehow Kennedy had got involved with the Madeleine Fund and all that PR exercise to do with that. And he knew these two guys called Dave Edgar and Arthur Cowley. They were supposedly probing leads that came to their office in the search for Madeleine. The press lapped up the stories and bigged up the reputation of Dave Edgar, this sort of super sleuth type guy, And around this time, Clarence Mitchell generated a story about Maddie being in the villages close to Praia de Luz. Alpha Investigations as a company only really ever existed in the pages of the news media. A check at company's house revealed that a company called Alpha IG was formed a few weeks after the stories in the press, and Arthur Cowley was the only director. In the press, it had been reported that AI, Alpha Investigations, was owned by Dave Edgar, but it wasn't. It was owned by Arthur Cowley. Alpha IG never traded. They've got nothing in their trading accounts. But a web domain for this company was registered by a man called Andrew Dickman, who was an associate of Brian Kennedy. So again, you're seeing some type of media operation and creation of a website to try and give this some kind of legitimate appearance, but it wasn't. Alpha Investigations basically concocted possible abduction scenarios. That's basically what they did. And then the press wrote about these. Alpha Investigations did not investigate them, including, for example, that a British paedophile called Raymond Hewlett, he was involved allegedly, and he got connected to the case. He was staying in Portugal, 30 miles from Praia de Luz, at the time of Madeleine's disappearance. Hewlett said that he was not responsible for the abduction. This is the paedophile. Hewlett said he was not responsible for the abduction, but knew a gypsy gang leader that had been involved in the abduction. So, it's a he said, she said story from somebody who's a convicted paedophile. So this was the peasant girl story, which I had on the other slide. Girl in Madeleine in Morocco photo is peasant farmer's daughter, Bushra. So they actually put this story out saying it was a sighting of Madeleine, but then a few weeks later or a few days later, they said no, it wasn't Madeleine after all. It was actually a peasant girl from this woman here who lived near Praia de Luz. So it's just another fake story that doesn't come to anything. And then there were various, as I've already alluded to earlier, there were various headline generations while this Alpha investigation was going on. Potato 3, Madeleine is alive, we know where she is, closing in on kidnappers, you know the sort of stuff, you've seen these stories. Maddie home for Christmas. And then there was this story in December 2008 that Madeleine had been thrown into a reservoir in de Bravura, 15 miles from Praia de Luz and off a tower on the dam. And Marcus Correa came up with this story, but eventually admitted it was a lie. So he'd made that story up. Okay, so we've now been going about an hour and 5 minutes, so I suggest we have a break there, and we'll carry on and look at the reconstructions and things and all the other aspects as well. So have a break there and